From the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, flying through the internet, your device, like a UAP, hauntingly unexplained and downright weird, this is the witching hours. We are ready to take off in the flash of an eye. Good evening to one and all, wherever or whenever you are listening to this program. I am Gina the Frost, and joining me, as always, is Medium Jenny Lee.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah, how are you doing?
Hoaxers is trying to get it to be Wednesday again. No.
We don't need to go back in
Thursday,
time.
buddy.
Yeah.
We're working on Friday.
Yeah, this has been our first week back to work after a nice spring break, so it's been we're getting through.
Bumpy road.
But we're getting there, and we got our summer right around the corner, so that's what we're working towards now. So we're getting a little excited.
Yes, almost there.
We have a good program for you tonight. I think you can see who our guest is. We're going to have Mark Hunter Brooks talk more about that later. So we're excited. We're having a good show tonight. We're going to talk about the Mandela Effect, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of other really interesting things.
Yes.
But first, we're going to get into the news. And welcome in, everybody. Right. We appreciate everyone who's coming in here and hanging out and chilling with us on this Thursday. Looking forward to our show tonight. So when we start the news, I have a last minute addition that I'm going to make because I didn't get at it because I actually saw the story right before we went live this evening. But the first story I have is CERN confirms its mistake. Neutrinos obey the speed of light limit after all. So I don't know if anyone had seen this story or not, but there's a story that
what are they talking about?
Neutrinos. There was a story that had come out just a while back that was saying essentially that at CERN, the super collider, they had done an experiment, and that some of these neutrinos had actually gone faster than the speed of light.
And what is a neutrino?
It is, when you start breaking down things into smaller and smaller. So you're talking about part of a particle. Yeah, particle. Particle accelerator. Anyway, the results initially that they had said that these had gone faster than the speed of light. Well, that is a huge revelation because Einstein, if I'm not mistaken, in his theory, the theory of relativity, he argues that nothing can go faster than the speed of light. That's going to be one of the rules of that we think of
universe, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, if this were to have happened, then all of a sudden, my mind went first thing to, well, if something can break the speed of light, then we have solved how we can travel across the galaxy.
Yes,
because that's one of the big things people forget about is that you can't pass the speed of light. So if you can prove that you can pass the speed of light, then that opens the door for a lot of things. But CERN has confirmed that the anomalous results, which indicated that neutrinos traveled faster than the speed of light, were caused by faulty machinery. The findings were reported on heavily last September, and since then, scientists the world over have been trying to explain how the neutrinos broke one of the fundamental laws of physics. Earlier this year, there was word that the team behind the results had found possible faults in its test equipment, and the error has now been confirmed. While it might seem like a huge blow to the team, CERN research director Sergio Bertolucci was pragmatic in his summary of the events. He thanked the scientific community for his collaboration on finding the error and explained why mishaps like this show the strength of science. So, important work that's done through that stuff, though. Kind of had my hopes up about it, but
faulty equipment. That's the story of our human existence, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know if we have Luce here today.
If only it worked right.
But we have a story straight for Luce, which is
we have one for Luce today.
A mysterious Corsican cat fox with large canine teeth A bushy tail and a silky coat will be named as a new species.
What?
After years of being dismissed as a myth, the mythical big-toothed cat fox, long rumored to prowl a Corsican forest, is real and may even be a new species that was previously unknown to science. The large cat has a bushy and ringed tail, a russet-colored belly, and short whiskers had been mentioned in generations of Corsican shepherd mythology. First cat fox was accidentally caught in a chicken coop in 2008. Since then, scientists have been studying the feline's population in increasing detail. Dubbed Jatu Volpe, I might be pronouncing that. In Corsican, the cat fox lives in the Asco forest on the Mediterranean island. Although the cat fox bears some similarities to domestic felines, it has a wider ears, shorter whiskers, highly developed canine teeth, and a bushy tail that typically has 2 to 4 rings and a black tip. Measuring around.
See, I'm looking at pictures of it right now. They're really cool looking.
Yeah, measuring around 35 inches from head to tail, the adult cat fox is big, has a dense silky coat that repels fleas, lice, and ticks, along with stripes on its front legs. And
only they all didn't do that.
Russet-colored belly. Yeah, so we have a new breed of the cat fox. So we have a new pictures. I'm sure they'll be showing up in our Discord.
Yes.
Go meet the cat
Share
fox.
that and the weird news.
Colombia's president removes police chief who cited using exorcisms to catch fugitives. So Colombian President Gustavo Petro on Wednesday removed the national police director who had talked about using exorcisms to catch fugitives. Neither Petro nor the defense ministry elaborated on reasons for the dismissal of General Henry Sanabria, a staunch Catholic who was appointed by Petro in August of last year, but Sanabria was under an internal investigation by the ministry over whether he had inappropriately allowed his religious beliefs to infringe on his duties. Sanabria had unleashed a debate about the impact of his faith on the police after his statements in an interview last month, including the police had used exorcisms to catch drug kingpins and guerrilla leaders. He also issued a strong condemnation of abortion, which is legal in Colombia. Although Colombia,
but here's the question, though: was it working?
I don't know. I can read further into the story. Maybe we can find out. Although Colombia is predominantly a Catholic country of conservative and religious traditions, it is a secular state under its constitution. Petro, who was sworn as the country's first ever leftist president last August, said Sanabria would never be persecuted over his religion, but that there must be separation between beliefs and the state. And it doesn't say whether the crime rate had gone up or down, but evidently he was catching guerrilla leaders and he was catching cartel
if it
members.
was working, maybe he had a new system going there. I don't know.
Yeah.
So what's the latest thing that you just found?
The Senate is going to hold a hearing on UAPs April 19th. So it's going to be another version of what we had last spring.
So once again, I'll force all my students to watch it live on television. Is that what we're saying?
April 19th. So next week, the Senate's going to be meeting and they're going to be once again discussing issues concerning the government, military, and UAPs.
Last year when I made them watch it, they got upset because the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial was on and we weren't watching that.
Oh, you weren't watching that. This is much more important.
It's like they're talking about UFOs. These aren't real. Let's watch Johnny Depp. High schoolers.
I mean, it's so interesting because people have been ridiculed for decades. I mean, almost for a century now. I mean, not quite a century, but getting close to it, 80 years.
Almost 80 years. Yeah.
For even mentioning it sometimes. And now we have elected officials discussing it and debating it and trying to remove stigma from it. I feel like, we've talked about this a lot. So it's going to be interesting. We'll wait and we'll see what happens. I will do my best to watch it. And when we come back on next show after that, we will discuss. And in the last little bit of news, so that's going to be important. So if you guys want to catch that, that's going to be next the 16th.
Next
19th.
Wednesday.
So
19th,
so maybe we can
get
some video on the Discord of it once some of it comes out if people miss it. And then the last little tiny bit of news is we had, if you were watching our videos that we released here recently, we had a new show segment that was coming out that we've had to cancel. So there's going to be no more weird stonks on Saturday night. Our stock show isn't going to happen, but we did have a lot of fun having a joke with you guys on April the 1st. So we appreciate everyone who tuned in for the live reveal.
I think Mark might be upset about it.
Hold on. Because I have a hot weird stonk tip.
What is that?
I was going to share that with you, but I'm sad to hear that, you know, we won't have a venue to share these things anymore. But I mean, this is a real by order event, man.
We'll
wow.
It's for the Woolly Mammoth Synthetic Swedish Meatball Corporation.
Oh, yes. The Mammoth Meatballs.
There we go.
I thought you guys would like that because rumors have it that the company is in negotiations with an unnamed Swedish furniture manufacturer to sell its Manny Meat frozen Swedish meatballs, which are made of synthetic mammoth meat flavored with mashed potatoes, cream sauce, and lingonberry jam through the manufacturer's retail stores. You heard it here first.
So you can jump over to the IKEA and get your...
And happy April Fools. I just wanted to lay that in there too, so I didn't get sued.
Yeah.
Man, imagine if they actually did that. Maybe they could come up with a Mammoth furniture line too, and I could actually use some of the furniture that I made.
It would be your size.
Could you see a Tusk armchair?
There you go. Yeah. Furniture fit for the Frost Giant.
I think Hoaxers and Linguist and Priestess of Wonderland were all very upset that the stocks thing wasn't for real. Yeah.
You guys have to know that I enjoyed a little bit, like a casually investment and stuff like that can be. A lot of things are interesting. Why I have a show about talking about. But trying to record that video and say things like to Medium Jenny Lee, trying to say, I know that this is really important to you. It was like I just had to pause the video and laugh for like 5 minutes before we could start back up again. Because I've never once in my life ever had a conversation about how much Jenny likes anything to do with banking or the financial world. So it was fun to make, and I'm glad everyone enjoyed it. And if you would like to start a stock show, I will come check out a stream.
Yes.
But probably not.
I think Linguist and Hoaxers should make a stock show. Get on it, people.
So, and while we're talking about Linguist, I wanted to thank her for all the funny ha-has on Medium Jenny Lee's Discord server. Yeah. Because I really enjoy, watching those or reading those every day. And also wanted to congratulate Keisha on her coffee mug design.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so is that inspired by the kawaii coffee cups? Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool. And too, just for Keisha, I was going to say, most people, when you have a coffee cup, you have a funny saying or something on there and then you just ignore it. But this one, each time she drinks, you'll know whether to talk to them or not. Yeah. So it's going to be something that's always going to be noticeable. So I just want to say that was a really cool idea.
And thank you for the tip on coffee for the coffee cup. That was awesome.
You're welcome. Yeah. Just to celebrate this coffee mug design because I thought it was really cool.
Yeah,
I might have to buy one now so I can use it for my tea on the stream.
There we go.
There you go.
We have a lot of really cool, really interesting, really talented people in our community. We're always grateful for it. And if you want to check out any of that and you're not, you can always join. We have 2 different Discords, one for me, one for this show, and always feel free to join there. The links are down below in the stream, and I can put those up in the description of the podcast as well. So feel free to come over, check out videos, post weird videos, and have some cool conversation. All right, so we've already talked a little bit tonight, but we want to welcome officially to the show tonight Mark Hunter Brooks, returning friend of the program, author of the book Earth's Hidden Reality. And we had him on last time, and we got about maybe halfway through some of the stuff we wanted to talk about, and we burned the midnight oil, and it was time to get off. So we're gonna do it again, and the same thing will probably happen tonight.
Yes.
But welcome back to the show, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. And thanks for having me back again. I'm really going to enjoy tonight. I hope I can answer your questions to your satisfaction. And let me put a disclaimer right up front to say these are my personal opinions, so take it for a personal opinion. But I try to work, or I've tried for years to work all these things out. And as I was telling you guys beforehand, is I try to put it all into systems, because people who are scientific, they say if you have an interdependent system, something's more likely to be correct. So that's why my book is all about systems. And when we talk about the Mandela Effect, and I was going to say the winning Mandela Effect to get CMC Air Boss a little bit upset, to say, oh yeah, that's what it is. But anyway, when we talk about that, I'm going to try and talk about it in terms of a system.
So we have done a show before where me and Janine kind of talked about the Mandela Effect. And we showed people showed chat, and on the video, we kind of showed examples and did polls of, do you remember this or do you remember this? And it's pretty interesting because I've talked to this about with a lot of people, and it's usually split right down the middle, and people become very, I won't say aggressive, heated. But people become heated. Like they know what they know, right? Like they remember something vividly, and maybe one of them like, oh, I don't know, it could have been either. But then there's always one where someone's like, nope, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, I think what's going on?
I think during that stream, Salty was the one who said, this is the hill that I will die on.
Yeah. The one for me is the Kit Kat bar.
Yeah.
For some reason, I just have a very vivid memory of what the Kit Kat logo looked like, and it had a hyphen in the. And the fact that it doesn't have a hyphen just blows my mind. Another one I think is a big one is the Fruit of the Loom logo. Because as a young giant, my mother purchased me. As a little kid, I wear the Fruit of the Loom tidy whities, and I can remember putting them on daily. What the tag on the back of it looked like, and. Evidently, it's either like a false memory, or I have slipped through some timeline, or who knows what it could be. What do we think this is, and what's your first initial reaction when you started looking at this interesting thing that's been going on with this phenomena with the Mandela Effect?
So you want me to go ahead?
Yeah,
go ahead. What do you think about?
Oh boy. So let me start out and say, think up. Let's get some, think more of why it exists. Why do you have the Mandela Effect? But think of it in terms of much bigger, broader concepts. Think of our existence on Earth. Why are we here? Why do you have mediumship? Why do you have, people who can do healing? Why do all these things happen? Why do they occur? And you have people that say, and you may or may not believe it, that, we're here as eternal spiritual beings learning how to play nice in the same sandbox with everybody, having experiential lessons, here on Earth. But to do that, you have beings in other dimensions, and this is why, I'm getting into my, reality as waves or whatever. You have beings in other dimensions, and then our spirits are in other dimensions coming down here to have this experience. But you have other beings that are controlling what's going on. And, a lot of people are very anxious and concerned about what's going on in society and around the world right now. And if you look at the Mandela Effect as just, part of something greater in terms of the time stream that we're in, that time stream has existed for all eternity. So everything's, the major events have already been planned. And really what's important for us is how we choose to respond to them, because that's the reflection of our maturity. So the issue is not, what's going to happen to everybody. It's going to be, how are you going to respond to it? And that's what you need to think about. And please type in the chat, your comments and thoughts and things as we go through. But I was trying to put this into a system. And if you think of us in a higher, or beings in a higher dimension being out of time, then that time stream would be a fixed fixed entity or whatever. So you'd have this continuum of time, and you can incarnate, into that time stream at different points in different bodies. So it's the body that has the experience, but you're experiencing what the body's experiencing and making decisions on how the body responds and stuff like that. So here's getting into the Mandela effect, is that beings have different levels of impact on time. So like a president of the United States or the director of the United Nations would have more impact on society in the world than somebody, here in North Carolina or Virginia or whatever. But everybody has a scope of impact. And for people that have even broader levels of impact, it may last for their lifetime. It may last for a generation, after they're gone. It may affect a specific geographical location. There's all sorts of different variables associated with all that. But at the very highest level, where you have people who make decisions that affect the world, I think that the beings who are driving those bodies, driving the personalities, are very mature spiritual beings, because you want to make sure that things are, very tightly tied down, that time doesn't change. So that at the high level, you have that progression through time, and all the things that are going to happen that we don't know about, that's already, known in the spirit world, and they know what's going to happen. They know how it's going to affect everybody. So it's all going to come down to how do we choose to respond to it.
So let me ask a question real quick, because I'm trying to catch up on, so for what you're saying here, are you saying that people essentially who have more importance sometimes or have more of an impact through these beings more than, say, just a typical person? Or are these people just kind of sporadically put to the earth, and sometimes they tend to have more of it?
Well, I'll use me as an example. So, I'm a spiritual being living in this body, but I may not be the only being to inhabit this body in a time stream. There may be 24 spiritual beings that come in here and live this lifetime. And when, this body dies, that's the end of their impact on the time stream. But you may have somebody who says something, incredible and changes CERN, by saying neutrinos really do go faster than the speed of light, and I can prove it, or exorcisms really do exist, or whatever, things that can really have a big impact on stuff. And that being would have, or that spiritual being in that body would have a greater impact on our existence. Now, this is getting into the Mandela effect, too, is because if you have beings that have a large span of control or have a large impact on what's going on, they're liable to make mistakes, too. So let's use Nelson Mandela as an example. He's the namesake of the Mandela effect. So maybe Nelson Mandela actually lived twice in that body. And the first time he died in prison, and they said, no, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to go on and become president. And so he came back again and, got out of prison, became president, and did all the things that we remember. But how are you, if you're a manager of that time stream, if you're, a time lord or whatever you want to call them, how are you going to account for that little minute difference in his life and his lifetimes? And you may make these little changes and things that won't have an impact on time, such as changes of words here or changes in pictures there, like the cornucopia on the fruit of the loom, that it won't make a difference, to the time stream. I think some time lord somewhere is regretting making that change to Berenstain Bears,
The Berenstain Bears is one that got him. That upsets a lot of people.
You don't mess with Dr. Seuss. You really, really don't. So
what the way that you're thinking about it is, like, for the way that you're explaining it is time. If we're thinking about the theory that all time is happening at the same time.
Yes.
Then we can insert ourselves into different places and different timelines, past or present or future, in different bodies.
In a different body.
And even be then there's could be other entities that wanted to try this one out. I don't know why, but they might want to, and then they're just like jumping around. And then the person who decided to design the Kit Kat logo, like one time it has the hyphen and the next time it doesn't.
Yep. And the being that did that could have been Jenny Lee 7 of 9.
Yeah, 7 of 9. Yeah.
So the way I'm kind of thinking about that is, I know, like, during the turn of the century, and like, when they had lots of labor issues and high immigration from Western Europe, and a lot of these immigrants, Irish immigrants and stuff like that, Italian immigrants coming into New York couldn't afford places to live. They worked at the factory for long hours, 11, 12 plus hours. And so they would get off of work and they would just go into like essentially what we would kind of think of as a hotel room. They would just have a bunch of beds in there and people would sleep in them, wake up and go to work. But then other people would just come in and jump in the bed and sleep for 4 or 5 hours, whatever they could before they went to work, like hot swapping or whatever like that. And so essentially something like that is kind of what is happening with our bodies, essentially, like coming in. Is that a good analogy or a bad analogy?
Yeah, and I would say take it up a level of abstraction when we talk about it. Is what's the purpose for us being here? Is to experience, life on Earth, interacting with each other, and maturing our consciousness. And I think linguists asked about consciousness the last time I was on, and I didn't really give a good response to it. But I was going to say, if you think of our consciousness as being this combination of an eternal, formless spirit, then you have a soul, which is like your personality for this lifetime. And then the mind is where the spirit and the soul kind of interact with each other and control your body. That's the way I look at it.
The UI, so to speak. The operating system. Yeah.
The operating. Yeah. And when you were talking about the cots and stuff, I was sitting there saying, I said, I know some electronics that are cot swappable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cot swappable electronics. So cot swappable people. But yeah, and I think even in the 17 and 1800s too, you had these overnight houses, for people who were on horseback or carts and stuff traveling, and they would just bunk down. They had 2 rooms, one for men and one for women, and you just bunk down on the floor and maybe go downstairs and sit around the fireplace and tell stories and laugh and sing songs and stuff, and then just go upstairs. I forgot what they call those places, but yeah, I think it was pretty common. But
linguist was trying to wrap her mind around it too. So she said it's pretty much making this impact memorable to an extent that becomes a certain truth for the time being. But because the time changes, the details get lost. Is that what it is?
That's getting there. I would agree with that. And let me give you a few tidbits of information. There's one website too that they stopped updating it in March of 2023, but they have a link to their books on Amazon. It's called www.mandelaeffect.com.
Okay.
And if you follow the link at that website, it'll take you to 15 ebooks that they created that was based on 4,000 entries into the Mandela Effect website, where people did comments about it. And so that's an interesting resource. And one of the quotes that I really liked on there that's kind of in line with what I was talking about, it said, and I'll read it to you. It says, "This has nothing to do," talking about the Mandela Effect. Excuse me. I had 2 helpings of peanut butter chocolate ice cream beforehand. So.
You had ice cream last time too.
Yeah, I know. So I'm coming down off the sugar high. This has nothing to do with financial gain. The A in Berenstain and Berenstain is a marker for every time processor in the event of an emergency to understand what reality they're in. There are so many more markers that are hidden from the public, yet each letter stands for age, date, time, and sequence. This information is true and has been provided for your understanding by a fellow time processor. And then they say, please watch out for the year 2029. So I don't know what that is. And he said, be prepared and watch out for the awakening. This may not make sense now, but will soon. And he says, please stop using your cell phones as they're the key ingredient of your society's collapse.
I believe that.
But that came from the website, and it was actually in a book called The Mandela Effect: Theories and Explanations by Fiona Broom and by New Forest Books, and it was on page 8 where that was, if you ever wanted to follow it up. But I thought that kind of fell in line with what I was talking about. And then another thing completely different. You all play video games all the time, and you have video game developers who you can get a university degree in video game development, which is very lucrative. I think these guys make a lot of money, and gals. But if you think about the engines that are used to generate the backgrounds and generate the physics of the environment, I think that would give you some other ideas as to how to look at the Mandela effect in terms of a virtual world. If you'd want to say we're in a simulation or we're in a virtual world.
That's what I was getting ready to say. Is that something that could be part of this? Is the idea of living in a simulation?
It could be, because what really has effect? I mean, outside of the Earth, what's one thing that we can do that would have an impact aside from doing a spaceship to the moon or Mars? There's not very much. Everything is pretty much self-contained within the planet. And I think it's the people that leave the planet that say, boy, we're really crazy down there, when they just see this little blue marble. I think is it's been described, and then all the things that go on, down inside it. But talking about these virtual reality engines, let's see, these engines control the physics surrounding VR worlds, including movement of characters, the angle of light, the strength of gravity, etc. Two leading developers for those engines are Unity and Unreal Engine. And each one of those developers, they have training videos that teach you how to use it. And it's quite a lot. I think I went through it about 4 or 5 years ago. I went through Unreal Engine, and they had over 100 videos, I think. But it really makes you think differently about your own life here on Earth when you sit there and think about how they set up things to have a virtual reality world.
Well, have you seen some of the most recent videos for the new Unreal Engine, Unreal Engine 5?
I have not. I actually did the training videos for Unreal Engine 4.
So Unreal Engine 5, there's games that are coming out in that now, and they've done a lot of, the company behind that has come up with some good videos explaining about what the benefits of Unreal Engine 5 are. And a lot of that is kind of connected to some of the stuff we're talking about, because some of the benefits of Unreal Engine 5 are things like being able to create seamless worlds where it can just copy something and put something there without the user really even having to, they can just have these things where it kind of fills in gaps. Which the benefit to video game designers and people creating inside of there is that it just makes it easier for them to be able to create, and they can take those things that are being done, and then they can edit those themselves as they want to. So I think there's some possibilities there in terms of using, like you said, creating a virtual world where you can see maybe glitches, like things that we call the Mandela Effect, that are being created almost through the programs that we're creating.
Right. And then there's some things with those engines too, is they only render so much for each one of the players. So they don't render the entire world for the different players, just pieces of it. And I've had or seen where some scientists have said, that's part of the simulation that we're in. We're only seeing some things. And if you don't look at the moon, it doesn't exist, some crazy stuff like that.
Well, some of that quantum physics stuff kind of proves that, doesn't it? Like if stuff isn't being looked at,
if it's not being observed,
not doing anything, or
Schrödinger's cat,
yeah.
So, and I was going to say, is it possible to anticipate a future Mandela Effect event?
Ooh.
So we think about 9/11, some significant things that have happened, on the planet, the Russia-Ukraine war, just some of the things that are associated with that. What could we do to try and, like create a trap for some change so that we know that it's happened? We can't write it down because I think the way people go back, or time processors go back to make these changes, they go back to where you had the first instance or the creation of the Fruit of the Loom logo or the Berenstain Bears logo, and they change it with that first instance. And I think that's what allows it to replicate all the way through, because like with Dr. Seuss books, if some publisher said, I don't like the C, it's got to be an A, you're going to have books out there in existence that would have the E, but every one of them was changed, even ones that were purchased, years ago.
And so that brings up the real question, because even me and Jenny have different, like we recognize different things. So I always remember Berenstain Bears, and I think you remember the Berenstain Bears, correct?
Correct.
I do too.
Okay, you remember Berenstain Bears.
Yes.
I'm one of the few that remember Berenstain Bears.
You're one of those other world people.
We got the hyphen between the Kit Kat.
We do have that one.
Well, you see, I don't remember the hyphen between the Kit Kat.
Oh, see, it's getting all mixed up now.
And so that's my other question, is if it was just some glitch where we all remembered the same thing and it was different.
Or it was like some had all of them and some of them had the other, but it's not. It's all mixed up.
And I was going to ask the question, why does this exist? And one way you can think about it is that everything that happens in the physical dimension can be changed by a time processor. You can go in and make a change at that point in time when this thing was created or this event happened and make that change. But since we're imported into this environment, and then our records, let's say, Jenny 7 of 9's Akashic record is in the middle dimension, but along with Jenny 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9, so you have different instances of spiritual beings using the same body. And I think that's what the Akashic records are, is it's a separate record, but you can't make that change in a record that's in another dimension. And I think that's why we have the Mandela effect coming around.
So we have different parts of the soul, essentially, that are living inside of a body, switching in and out. And we have parts that come back and remember what happened before the time was changed, the timeline was essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's and think about people who did past life regressions, folks that have pains in their leg that they don't know why, that happened. And you do a past life regression and find out that they broke their leg in a previous life, or someone who's afraid of the water, they drowned in a previous life.
Yeah, so I have something similar to that. I did a past life regression. I won't go through the whole thing, but long story short, I got stabbed in my side, like up kind of underneath my armpit. And, we talked about the past life regression. We went and had it done and all that stuff. And we talked about it. And I think maybe even years went by. And then I was like, you know what? I have a birthmark there. Yep. And it's like a sideways birthmark, like a knife wound would be. And it was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. So there you go. There's an example of it.
There was a professor at the University of Virginia who did a study on that. Do you know about that one?
Yes.
Ian Stevenson, he did a 2-volume, 1,100-page study of 265 kids who remembered their previous life, and he correlated the birthmark and birth defects to the fatal stabbing or wound or whatever in their previous life. So he coordinated the location of it. So what you were saying is right in line with what they did.
Right on.
Yeah. And those the actual 2-volume set of that study is very hard to get, and I think they did an abridged version that I think is still available on Amazon. But if you wanted to see the actual study, it's very hard to find. As are a lot of metaphysical books, are very hard to find.
Yeah.
Well, we live
really close
45
to
minutes to UVA, so I bet if I went to the library.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or just go to the Division of Perceptual Studies. They have a really nice building. I've been to it. And
excellent.
it's a nice place to take a tour of it, or at least be known.
Yeah.
Go in and take a selfie with some of these people there. So it's fun.
Well, that's
The
definitely.
linguist was saying that she's heard of that being called soul shifting. Have you heard of that term, soul shifting?
No, I haven't.
She was saying that she's read that, I'm not sure in what, but that what you were talking about has a term, and it's called soul shifting.
Okay.
Yeah, which is a great name for it.
Yeah, it is.
That is a good
The way
name
you're explaining it. Yeah.
Yep. So, we all have different Mandela Effect examples. I have a couple religious ones.
Oh.
And no one even talks about it. Even in these books, they don't talk about it. But one thing I remember from my childhood is there was a verse in the Bible, and it was talking about the lion will lay down with the lamb. Or do you remember that?
I've heard that. I have heard that.
The lion and the lamb will lay down together. Well, guess what it is in the Bible now? It's the wolf and the lamb.
The wolf?
Yeah, there you go. I knew that would get you.
Yeah.
The lion and the lamb makes way more sense than a wolf.
Right. So it's the wolf and the lamb, and people who have researched this have gone back to the first Bibles that were printed in 1611, and it says the wolf and the lamb.
Wow.
So talking about going back to the point of creation where they printed it the very first time, you make the change there, and that runs everything back through. That's my thought on it. But I also had another thing too when we were talking about anticipating a future Mandela Effect event.
Yes.
And this is a religious thing too, is Jesus's death on the cross. And then Paul was a guy who went around and he was persecuting the Christians, and he had this light shine down on him on the road when he was going to go imprison Christians in Damascus, and he became a great, advocate for Christianity. But if you look at it from a Mandela Effect standpoint, is that this event had such great impact because it's had an impact for 2,000 years that you wanted to make sure that it got right in history. And you don't know if Jesus was going to get it right the first time or not. Just like Nelson Mandela may not have gotten it right the first time or not, and died in prison and then came out and did all this. So what, just theoretically or, hypothetically, let's say, Jesus cried like a baby on the cross and hurled expletives at everybody and was just a really, spicy person, as linguists would say. We're talking about linguists. He was really spicy. So what would happen? So Paul would go around and he'd just kill everybody. And I see Paul's life as being the risk management for the time processors, is to say, if Jesus didn't do it right, Paul would go and kill off everybody, and then they'd restart everything and do it all over again. And then when he did get it right, they would convert Paul to be an advocate for Christianity, and he would go on to write, most of the books in the New Testament. So I was trying to look at that from a Mandela Effect standpoint. I don't know if that affects anybody or any of the people who are listening on the chat.
Definitely spicy.
Yeah, definitely spicy.
I mean, I don't want to be sacrilegious here, but
yeah,
I can see in some ways, if following this idea through, could you draw some comparisons to the story of Jesus and then kind of what happens with this Mandela Effect with Nelson Mandela, of like this person who died but then comes back to do this good in the world.
There you go. That's a good way to think about it. There's all sorts of different ideas when you talk about, geographic impact, a time impact, community impact. There's all different ways to slice that up.
Interesting for sure.
Yeah. So CMC Air Boss, you brought that up in February. So I hope if he's on,
back around again.
He is.
Yeah, he is. He's here.
I hope that answers some of your questions or give you some ideas or thoughts or whatever.
So linguists learned about the soul shifting term in a class that she's taken about the Akashic Records. And she said you can go there and find out whether you're mono-souled or you have 2+ souls occupying your body at different times. And it can happen daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly.
I definitely have 2+.
your thoughts there and your theories about all of that, for
I
sure.
think all Geminis get at least 2, right?
At least, good Lord.
Oh, no. There's different ways you can look at it. I think everyone's body has 2 spirits in it. You have a conscious spirit and an unconscious spirit. So your conscious spirit's doing your senses and your conscious movement of your muscles and things like that. Your unconscious spirit is doing the healing at night when your conscious spirit is off, in the astral while you're dreaming and stuff like that. And it's managing the autonomic nervous system, your heartbeat, your lung rate, your breathing, and all this other stuff, the digestion. It's doing that. So I think there's 2 spirits in your body. That's just me. That's my belief, not, everybody else's. But then you can look at having beings in different dimensions as you come down from the mental dimension to the astral, to the etheric, to the physical. You can have potentially a consciousness in each one of those dimensions. I don't think that's true, but that's another way you could look at it. So what does linguists say?
She said, wouldn't subconscious be considered ego?
There's different ways you could look at it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it depends on, and it goes back to your own spiritual path. It's how have you interpreted all these things that you've experienced or that you've read, or you try to understand and fit it into your own philosophy or your own worldview. And whatever you believe, is what's right for you, whatever it is. And I tell people, I think I may have said this before, is, I don't care where people are, and what they're doing spiritually and what they're involved with, but they need to be on a spiritual path somehow. Because I think if they're on a spiritual path, they're eventually going to end up in some place where they want to be. They may be off on some little side road or, off in a ditch somewhere, but they'll eventually get back on the road. But I really feel for people who just feel like they can get up and, go to work, go out to the lake and ride around on boats, go out and party and stuff like that, and not do anything thinking about their spiritual side of life.
Yeah. I keep going back to this quote that I heard from Braca Goldsmith, who's a very well-known astrologist on YouTube. And she said in one of her latest videos, "We didn't come here to just eat, sleep, watch TV, and worry about money."
Right. Right.
And I just keep thinking about it, because it just keeps coming up. And it's so true. It's like there's so much more to this existence than those things,
Right. And I think if you take it seriously, going back and asking that question, why are we here, and trying to build your worldview from that high of a level, you can come down and have some reason for the things that you do in your life and why you need to have a spiritual component to your life as well as your physical component. And then earlier in your lifetime, you're going to have less time spent on that because you have to get an education, you have to get a job, you have to raise a family, and do all those things. And I think in Eastern religions, they say they divide your lifetime up into quarters, and your first quarter is learning, second quarter is family, and then the third and fourth quarter is your spirituality and focusing on that. So that's, in my mind, that's why you have older people who are more serious or more focused on the spiritual side of things.
So I think this is a good segue into something that you wanted to ask our viewers about, it's the spiritual path.
Oh boy. Well, thank you. So for the people listening in, you can find some other videos of me out on the internet talking about, I either call it a spiritual development framework or a spiritual path framework. But it's essentially something I put in my book from the very first version, where I talk about what that path looks like, because I feel like a lot of people, they'll go to religious institutions, to their services, they'll go to conferences, to workshops, to peak experiences, and they'll figure that, over time, I'll figure out what spirituality is all about. But what they end up getting in each one of these events is little tidbits of information that don't necessarily fit together into a cohesive whole. And one of the things I've tried to do in my books is to include a description of that spiritual path and what it looks like, to help people figure out where they are and where they should go. And then to help them be more discerning when they're trying to decide, should I go to this conference or this seminar? How's it going to benefit me? What am I going to get out of it? Should I, learn meditation or not? Should I learn how to quiet my mind or not? If you know that it's going to be directly applicable to your spiritual walk, then you'll be more apt to try and do things or address things than not. So that's what that was. But in the spiritual path that I published, I had really two paths in it. One was the path for, everyday life, is figuring out, there's a spiritual side of life, learning about it, living it, then having questions to try and reconcile what you've understood intellectually with your life experiences and spiritual practice. And then you reconcile that and internalize it. And that's what gives you this independent, unique spirituality in your life. But I think young people that are coming in today, they have more spiritual abilities. You have a lot more people who are doing healing, energy work, mediumship, who have had out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences or whatever. And I think they're trying to figure out what all that is. And I've heard there was one person who said that could be one of the contributors to anxiety that people have, as they have some of these things that have happened to them that they don't know what it is, they don't know why they have it, they don't know where it comes from or what its purpose is. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask, how does that resonate with you? Because that's not necessarily the spiritual path, it's more the mystical path, because you're coming in already knowing that there's something there. You know it for a fact because you can practice it. And you have to do different things, but you're doing different things than like the older generations have done, who didn't really have those experiences to where they can hang their hat on that and say, yes, I know there's something out there, something exists. And I think that's a big discrepancy between older generations and the younger ones. And I just want to see how that resonated with people, because I don't get the opportunity to talk to people, younger people, all the time.
Lou said, the most comfort I have had is finding my mystical path. It honestly saved my life. Mm. And for me personally, not that I'm that young, but me personally, like reading your book and like the spiritual path that you went on, like you were from a religious family, you grew up with religion, and that was not my experience. So mine was a little bit backwards, and it was what you said, like I had spiritual experiences. I had things that I couldn't make sense of, and they did cause me anxiety and they did cause me depression. And I didn't know what to do about them until I started to figure it out on my own.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I was asking that is because, at least from a religious institution standpoint or a faith tradition standpoint, is you would treat younger people differently than you would treat older people, because they're at a different point on that path. And I think the younger people are more on a mystical path because they have a lot more spiritual energy in them. They're a lot more acquainted with these different spiritual abilities and things that are going on. They may not know why it's there, and that's what they need to find out. But they're at a different place in their life than people who are 20 or 40 years older than they are, who have never had an experience like that.
And I think personally that the experience of a younger person on a spiritual path now is different than a younger person who is on a religious path. Earlier in life, when they were younger, with newer generations, and an example of that would be, I grew up Lutheran, and I was being taught that religion. And I believed it, and I was taught it. And then if I had a question, I had to ask someone about it, and they told me the answer. Whereas what I see a lot with the community that goes on now, the social community and stuff like that, is you still have teachers and you still have people like that, but people are having their own experiences, and they're bringing those to the table where they're kind of met and discussed and given reason, instead of, hey, I experienced this, and then being told through whatever religion that is, well, this is for that, or this, what happened or didn't happen. That makes sense.
Yeah.
There's just less, I think there's just less rules.
Right. And you're making me think of something. There's a lady I know, Elizabeth Sabet. She's out in Texas, and she does a lot of work with spiritual emergence and spiritual emergencies, people who get in trouble with the spiritual stuff. And she makes a very strong point when she teaches her classes on transformational coaching, is you don't want to tell somebody what their spiritual experience is. Oh, this is this or this is that, because you're robbing them of their own interpretation of it. And I just thought I'd throw that out there because it means something to somebody to figure that out and to have that understanding.
Linguist just said the same thing. She said, spiritually, for each of us, it's going to be different, and it's hard to say what's true.
Yeah.
And the second someone tells me, and this is just me, I'm not trying to be overly zealous here. The second someone tells me they have all the answers, I'm not going to listen to anything they have to say.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, and one thing I like to say to people when I talk about this spiritual path is that once you have reconciled what you intellectually understand about spirituality with your life experiences and your spiritual practice or the spiritual abilities you have, and when you reconcile it, and that's when you go through this questioning process. So questioning is an essential part of the spiritual path. But when you reconcile it and you internalize it, you have a much stronger spirituality than when it was just based on, what you read in a book.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's a knowledge, it's to say, you can tell me all you want about how great chocolate ice cream tastes or peanut butter chocolate ice cream tastes. But I know it, from experience that it tastes really good.
You just had some.
And I'm just coming off that sugar high right now, and you can't deny me my sugar high.
Amber was saying, if I didn't have my spiritual path, I would have been overcome with anxiety and depression a long time ago. I would definitely not be living the life I'm living now. I come from a Christian background, and I'm very interested in a lot of religions, but I feel my path has become spiritual versus religious.
Okay. So would you consider yourself spiritual but not religious?
That's a good question.
Yeah. And that's interesting. And I think, we know that there's been a decline, especially in Europe. But there's been an overall decline
in the US too.
Yeah, in religiosity, whatever that is. But I think, and it's interesting because I think by the other side of that scale, you've seen people become a little bit spiritual or embrace reality, and whether those things actually end up not those. But I think either way, you've kind of seen the balance, the scales balance. People are still looking. It's not like people have just stopped asking those questions or trying to find those answers. Everyone, I think, asking the questions and trying to find the answers, they're just starting to look at times different places.
Right.
So that's interesting. And, it even brings up the idea of what about the people who don't believe? People who, because there's, at times been a rise in atheism. But sometimes I'm starting to find that, and not to offend any atheists, but a lot of the atheists I've known are people who have been atheists. I probably would have considered myself at some point in time, a long time ago. It almost feels like a break room. Like I'm I'm tired of dealing with this right now. Nothing out there can prove anything to me. I need to worry about these things are what I'm worried about right now. And then eventually, I think a lot of times atheists are like, okay, so now I'm more agnostic. Let me find out what's going on.
Well, and I think atheism can be explained and defended. So a lot of times you have people from religious traditions, they'll quote scripture or doctrine or dogma, but they can't defend it. But you can defend atheism as a belief. And especially people who are more rational or in the scientific fields and things, that's important to them because they're always on the search for objective truth. And they want to be able to objectively prove something that they believe instead of just accepting something, based on what they've read. So I would say that there, and there's also a book that I really, really liked. It has a picture of an empty bird cage on it, and it's what was it? And it was something like I left Christianity because, or I left my faith because. And it was stories that were in this atheistic magazine, that was saying I left Hinduism because, and over 90% of these things, the stories that I read, the people gave it a really good, serious effort to try and understand. They were, trying to understand the faith of their parents that they were brought up in, and they just couldn't do it. And it isn't anything that they were going off being a heathen or a pagan or whatever like that. They were really trying to understand and just couldn't do it to the level that they wanted to understand it. And that's all well and good, and I'm perfectly fine with that.
I think it's important for us as the human race to have the balance between all of those things.
Yeah.
And I'll go back to what I said earlier too. I don't care what spiritual path you're on, as long as you're on a spiritual path. And I think even for an atheist, if they're always asking those questions, even if they just get it reinforced that what they believe is correct, that's fine. I'm perfectly fine with that. I just feel like you need to be on a path. It doesn't matter what that path is, because you're eventually going to get somewhere better or different than where you were.
Yeah, and like I said, I agree. I think it's important to have all kinds of different people like that, because if you don't have the skeptic, then what do you have? I mean, everyone can just run wild, and there's no one to be like, well, hey, why do you believe this? Why, this doesn't make any sense. What is the evidence that you have for this? So almost a scientific method to, religion, or definitely a role that's still being played there, an important one. Of course, not trying to say that they're not ultimately correct, but yeah, I think all three kind of play to a certain role.
Right. And
Amber answered the question. Okay. She said, I think I'm trying to make sense of both, intertwine them. But if I had to pick one, I don't think you have to choose. I would say spiritual over religious.
That's cool. And I was going to say, too, from leadership courses, you find out that it's always important to have a naysayer or someone who has a different opinion or point of view in your group, because you'll come up with a better solution than if you didn't.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's important to have people with all kinds of backgrounds and experiences in there. And I also wanted to mention one other thing, too, especially for people who are dealing with organized religion or faith traditions, is how you can talk about the spiritual path and its relationship to religion when you're talking to spiritual leaders and things. Is I like to equate the spiritual path and people that are on it, when you put religion alongside it, is to say, think of it in terms of the growth of a child. And when you're in those initial stages of your spirituality, you're trying to get that intellectual understanding. You're trying to hear all these different points of view. That's when you're more directed, when the faith tradition has a real strong role in it. But when you start questioning what you believe, when you start trying to reconcile your life experiences and your spiritual practice with what you've been told, that's more of like an adolescent stage in your development. And when you internalize that spirituality and emerge from that and have a unique spirituality, and it's not a cookie cutter based on a denomination or, a religious tradition, that's more of the adult stage of that relationship. And then your relationship with organized religion should be more peer-to-peer when you have that strong spirituality. But understand that it's unique, and don't let anybody tell you that you need to believe this or believe that. Mm-hmm. But if you can describe it in terms of the growth of a child to adulthood and the relationships and how they change over time, I think that's a good way to present it to people in different organized religions.
Unless they think that you're just calling them children, then they might get mad.
No, well, yeah, there you go. So
I think about the way that we've been talking about it, and the way that I've thought about it for a while is, it's the personal experience versus someone who hasn't had a personal experience.
Right.
You can read all the books you want, but unless you experience something yourself, I think that's what really molds your spirituality, is the personal experience.
Right. And I know a lot of people,
whether it ends up being religious or not,
Right. Yeah, and there's people who are religious who are also
have religious
spiritual
experiences.
Yeah, they have a spiritualism in their religion. They could be whatever denomination of Christianity, and they've had that personal experience, and they heard an angel tell them something or God tell them something, and they believe it 100%, which is really no different than what people are experiencing when they call themselves spiritual.
Right. Yeah. And that's like the mystical side of different faith traditions. And like for the Abrahamic traditions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Islam has the Sufis, the Jews have the Kabbalah and the Kabbalists, and Catholics have the monasteries and monks and nuns. Protestants don't. They don't have anybody.
Yeah, you're right.
So, and that's where I think you get some of these issues. But I also know people who are on the metaphysical side who are really are trying really hard to have spiritual experiences if they've not had any. And it's almost like, everybody else is having it, so I need to try and have it too. But
that actually brings up something I had forgotten I wanted to talk to you about, but was pretty interesting because talking about forced spiritual experiences, we were having a conversation the other night about DMT and ayahuasca.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was curious. I just kind of had a realization, like an epiphany, that could be complete BS. But in the moment, my feeble brain was able to try to start putting together something. And I wondered if it wasn't possible that DMT and the DMT that exists naturally in living things somehow wasn't a connector or a key to the metaphysical.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, people can say they when they take ayahuasca, when they do that and they go through the ritual of it, that they have these spiritual experiences and they go to the other side. But this is the same chemical that's released in our brains at certain points when we die, and that exists in plants that are used naturally. And if this often drugs are seen as this artificial thing. Right. But what if DMT was actually some kind of natural doorway into the metaphysical?
Yeah, there was an author, not Oscar Bernardo. His last name is Bernardo. But he wrote a book called More Than Allegory, and it had 3 parts to it. And the third part that he wrote about was he secretly participated in a program called Trilobite. And that was in Europe. And he would tell his employer that he was going on a week's vacation, and he was going to this facility to get strapped down on a table and given DMT. And, he would have these trips and then tell people what he experienced. It's not Oscar Bernardo is a friend of mine that I used to work with, and that's what's kind of blocking me from this.
Like his last name is Bernardo Kastrup?
Bernardo Kastrup, yes, Bernardo Kastrup, More Than Allegory, Part 3, and he talks about that. But one of the things that when people have had these different experiences is it real? And you don't know if it's real or not, or if you were just hallucinating or you have some other kind of explanation for it. And that's why I feel like it's important to do things in pairs or in a group. I don't know if you can have a DMT or an ayahuasca experience like that, but who was it? Who was the guy that wrote My Big Toe?
I don't know. I do not know.
I'm not familiar with that.
Robert. Well, anyway, My Big Toe. He was the author of that.
Thomas W. Campbell.
Tom Campbell. Yeah, great guy. He was one of the first engineers to work with Robert Monroe, putting his laboratory together to do hemisync and binaural beats. And one of the things that he did was he traded his work, helping Robert Monroe out with learning how to do out-of-body work. And he didn't believe it until one day that he and another engineer went on a trip together. And Monroe had them in their little check units, which is really just a twin bed with a blackout curtain over a built-in thing. So it's not a real, high-tech thing. But they went out on an out-of-body experience together. And they were out for 2 hours. And Monroe was asking them questions while they were out because he had a microphone and speakers and stuff. And they were telling him what was happening almost to the minute within each other.
Wow.
They were experiencing things together. And when they finished, they went back to the control room and Monroe played the tapes back, synced together. And when they heard that they were saying the same things at the same time, that's when Tom Campbell wrote, he says, I just said, hey, this could actually be real. And he said, that's what he said for like the next 36 to 48 hours is this could actually be real. This could actually be real. And that drove him for the rest of his life. And he just finished a Kickstarter campaign, trying to do experiments in that.
Interesting.
But so I would say do something in pairs. And then also too at mystery schools, when they try to teach the reality of guided meditation or some of the other things is they'll have partner meditations. And like a teacher and a student will hold hands and do a guided meditation together. And then they'll talk about how things were similar when they come back. Mm-hmm. So I think it's when you have that validation that someone else can provide. And I'm not saying it's not happening with ayahuasca or DMT experiences where people may go out together. I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of the question. I wonder if that has been looked at. And I think in the conversation that Janae and I were having, we were hypothesizing kind of if, for instance, like her as a medium, it'd be interesting to find out. Is she naturally releasing some kind of DMT when she does a medium read? If that wasn't some kind of chemical key to what separates someone who, like we talk about, most mediums will tell you everyone has the ability to do it. Everyone can access it. Everyone can do it. Is what learning how to do that could that be learning how to have your body naturally release some kind of chemical that opens up a door?
But then he still goes back to the question that Mark is asking. Does that mean that it's a hallucination or is it real? Yeah. Right.
But the question is, the thing about that, Mark, and I'll let you go because I've been interrupting you and I apologize.
That's okay.
But the reason I thought about it, and when we were having this conversation, I said, I have to ask Mark when he's on, is because if that's true, could that be a scientific, the scientific Rosetta Stone, so to speak, for showing the metaphysical to be real or supernatural ability, whatever you want to.
Yeah. I mentioned Arthur Powell's work on my previous visit, and he wrote a book on the etheric body, and I think he called it the health web or what is it, the health body or whatever. But in one chapter, he talked about something called the atomic web. And he said there's an energy field around everybody's body that keeps the astral and the higher level dimensions from communicating with you in the physical. But either when you're ready, spirits will get rid of that, or if you have a near-death experience, or you try and do development work, or you're an alcoholic or have substance abuse, you'll destroy that. And then all of a sudden, you'll have all these things happen to you. And you open yourself up to all these experiences. That's why you may have spiritual beings come into alcoholics and, kind of keep them in alcoholism or whatever, is because they've lost that atomic web that's protected them from those incursions. But if you do mediumship development work, or if you just have this natural ability, that atomic web is gone. And I want to say that you have an atomic web at each one of the different dimensions, because your spiritual abilities can be greater, or you could have access to spiritual abilities in different dimensions. Different people can have different levels of access depending on their purity and illumination of what they do. So that's my explanation for it, but it's in Arthur Powell's book on the etheric body, and it's called The Atomic Web.
We have a question from chat here from Michael. As before we get off this topic, what's your thoughts on a vision?
Are you talking like a shamanic quest?
I think that's what he's talking about.
I think that's what he's talking about. If you want to clarify for that in chat, go ahead, Michael. But yeah, I think that's what he's.
I think any spiritual experience is a good experience. You just have to develop your worldview as a result of it. Mm-hmm. So if it helps you become more spiritual, I think that's good. I will say, and I put this in my book, is you need to have a mentor, someone who's been down this road to let you know what the pitfalls are or where the ruts in the road are. But from a spiritual practice development, you need to quiet your mind. It would be you, and either develop yourself, your mediumship skills or your energy sensitization or whatever, but quiet your mind is the first thing, and learn how to focus your mind. The difference between a laser and an incandescent light bulb, because the basic functions of a lot of these metaphysical things is focus and concentration, intention, and visualization. And the fourth thing that's also important to it is knowing that it works, is having a belief for that. And I think that's why a lot of people have these abilities now. And I don't think I said it with you guys, but I really want to say on like a scale of 1 to 10, what people have here is like a level 1 or level 2, even though they think they have really a lot of power or a lot of abilities. It's really at a very low level. But what's happening is these spiritual beings are allowing you to develop your belief that it works, because that's going to be essential for you to be able to do these things at a higher level or with much greater effect. But let it happen. Let things happen. Don't try and force things. And I'll say spiritual beings will actually activate your Kundalini when you're ready for it. You don't have to go out and try and get a Kundalini awakening or take some classes or whatever. It's when you're ready for it, when you've purified your mind and your heart to the point to where you can handle it, and you've had the spiritual experiences to where it's not going to scare you, then they'll actually activate your Kundalini for you. So that's just one thing. I know that's another rabbit hole if you wanted to go down, but but spirit will do a lot of things for you metaphysically.
Michael did update his question. He said, yes, a shamanic journey. The Vision Quest is a shamanic journey for 4 days without water or food.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wonder if that point, if you're not getting into a near death state again, where your body's releasing some kind of DMT, I wonder if those things could be related. And I could be completely wrong. I'm by no means an expert on any of that stuff. It was just something that popped in my head the other day, and I wonder why I'm having, it seemed like a connection that I made that was just worth exploring.
Yeah, well, also too, having a 3 or 4 day journey where you're not eating or drinking anything is going to make it essential that you have a very strong meditation ability.
Yeah, and I don't think you're going 3 or 4 days playing Madden football either. You're sitting there. You have an intention. You've set an intention of meditation, and so I imagine.
But it's got to be deep. I mean, and I haven't done it, but I would say almost like samadhi, if you know of samadhi type meditation, and not where your heartbeat stops, but to where you've really slowed down your body processes and things. But I think it's really more of a test of your shamanic abilities, is to be able to successfully go through that. Otherwise, you'll drive yourself crazy being in a dark cube or hole or whatever for 3 or 4 days with no food, nobody coming to talk to you or whatever. But if you're in a trance or a meditative state, the time will just fly by, and when they come get you, you'll say, oh, that felt like just a few minutes.
Yeah. And that also kind of reminds me of like asceticism, like, because like looking back at like late antiquity and the early Christians, using asceticism and to try and define religion. So, and once again, another connection. Spirituality, shamanistics. And
yeah, and I want to say, like the Desert Fathers, the ascetics, they were trying to have the spiritual experiences like you have a lot of people today. The one that I like is, an ascetic getting in a hollowed out tree and having rocks poured down in it so he couldn't move, so he couldn't sin for 2 days or whatever.
Yeah,
fun, good times.
There's lots of interesting. Are the ones that would live on top of the pillars? They'd be like a little like a pillar, like that way up in the air, just like a circle pillar, and they would live on top of there for months at a time. People would like raise food up to them. And other than that, they slept up there, and they would stand up there and they would meditate. pray, and they would top of us.
Yeah, and I want to say there was a Greek philosopher. I know I'm going to get it wrong, but it started with a D. I want to say Diogenes or whatever, who lived in a big jar out in the open, and that's where he lived and ate and slept and whatever and stayed out of the rain, if you can imagine a jar that big. But supposedly he had, some spirit. People would listen to him. Even Alexander the Great came to visit him. And he would curse and hurl expletives at people. And
yeah. Well, I mean, I guess
a lot of those ancient Greek vases could get really huge.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
Store a lot of stuff in them over a long period of time. So yeah.
I mean, I guess you have cases of asceticism things, because then you even have Buddha starving himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Get the middle path. Yeah, interesting. So thanks for the question, Mike.
So the real Mr. Weird was kind of
Diogenes.
Circling back to the substance. He's saying shamans typically use a sort of substance to access spiritual. Do you think there are consequences or pitfalls to this type of access?
That's a good question, because I was wondering that myself.
it really depends on what you're going to do with it, and are you going to believe it when it happens, or if it happens?
Yeah.
Are you going to say, well, I had a hallucination, I don't believe it, or have some other explanation than a spiritual experience? So if you don't think you're going to definitely call it a spiritual experience, then it's probably not worth having. And then also too, when you're ready for it, and this has been my experience, that spiritual beings will give you the experience. They'll give you the abilities and things when you're ready for it. You just have to quiet your mind, learn how to focus, and then purify your heart and mind. And it's the mystical path process that I talked about, in my spiritual path. It's the mystical path that people who already know about all this stuff go on. But when you do that, you get access to all these different abilities. And just to kind of go way down the line, when people say you need to control your emotions, you need to control your ego, at some point you'll be asked to control your thoughts too. And it's when you can control your thoughts and stop your thoughts is when you're going to get access to the real high-end level stuff, because it's when you can think and just focus your attention on something that you can cause things to happen immediately. But most people won't have access to that in this lifetime or this time stream. It'll be something you'd experience on a different planet or in a different realm.
Yeah. But it's possible.
And then the real Mr. Weird asks, shamans typically substance. Well, when we talked about that, I know we just talked about that.
Okay.
I wanted to add on to it. My thought I wanted to add on to it is, I'm no expert, so but my personal idea on that is that there can be consequences or pitfalls to it whenever you're using some kind of substance like that. So while I wouldn't say it's not something that someone should do, I think that person definitely needs to be kind of aware of how they use it, when they use it, and why they're really using it, and making sure that that's not becoming some kind of chemical crutch that they're using for another reason other than trying to access that as part of a ritual doing so often or something like that, rather than all of a sudden every day they need to come home and do this thing so they can have their spirit. You know what I mean? Like I don't think you ever want to find a situation where that substance is a crutch. And I don't know if that's what you meant, real Mr. Weird, but that was one thing that I've been thinking about. Someone who typically hasn't done a lot of things like that. I've been interested, you listen to, I'm going to forget the name now, Mark McKenna, people who have talked previously about using things like that to access the other side. It's become an interesting thing, listening to people who have come away completely changed from their experiences of going through using ayahuasca in a ritual. But I imagine
even,
there
they
definitely
have
is
medical acid, LSD stuff now too, where you can go in and have a doctor administer it. So
like in the microdosing with mushroom, and that's like
LSD too. They're doing
with LSD. That's being done by doctors.
Yeah,
but I think there's It's that fine line, right? It's like, why are you using it? And I think that becomes the question.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a meme that I think Linguist posted was, these LSD highs are fine until you piss off the pancakes, and they
yeah.
But I was going to say, just to underscore the importance of a mentor, somebody who has been on that path before, who knows what you need and what you don't need, and how much or how little you need. And then also, if you get in a situation that's beyond what you feel comfortable with or what you can handle, that's called a spiritual emergency. And there's people who can help you through that, or help you assimilate things that have happened to you that you don't understand. But it's called a spiritual emergency. And there was actually a book Stan Groff published 30 or 40 years ago that was really a good book. It was called Spiritual Emergency. And then this lady I mentioned, Elizabeth Sabet in Texas, Sabet, she can help people with spiritual emergencies and spiritual emergence.
That's something.
Yeah, you've mentioned her to us before, I think.
Since you started talking about it.
Yeah, we might have to reach out to her to actually see if she would like to come to the program.
She's really good. She's a former president of ASSIST, the American Center for the Integration of Spiritually Transformative Experiences, and she taught a workshop for psychologists and spiritual advisors and things of how to acknowledge and help people assimilate things that have happened to them, especially near-death experiencers, because a lot of times their family and friends will shut them down when they say, I had this experience when I nearly died. And I've talked to people who, got shut up and didn't talk about it for 15 or 20 years, and they were just so happy that somebody would understand. And that's one of the benefits that, someone who's been through this kind of training can help with. And then the last thing I want to say, chapter 10 of my book, I said, fools go where angels fear to tread. That's what happens when you don't have a mentor, you don't have somebody helping you out, is you can get caught up in all kinds of situations that you don't want to be in. And I mentioned a few of them in my book. The one that caused me the most consternation was I ended up causing myself to stutter for about 1.5 years. Because of the way I was doing these exercises. I wasn't doing it right. And so if you had somebody to teach you, you wouldn't have this problem. But that was one of the things I had to deal with. Yeah. So and I write about it in my book. So
personal experience.
Teachers are important. Teachers are important no matter what realm you're in, no matter what you're studying,
no matter what you're learning.
Happen to be.
Yeah.
I think for sure. And I think that's something when we have our witching hours escape to New Mexico, where we go on our ayahuasca retreat, we will make sure that we have a class A a class A shaman to go.
Yeah. Linguist going back to Buddha, Linguist wanted to know if you thought that Buddha did reach complete enlightenment. Second part to that question, what would your absolute enlightenment be?
Oh boy, I don't think I'm anywhere close. I'm still trying to purify myself, on that. I think I'm on the mystical path instead of the spiritual path, but still trying to get to that point. Buddha was got to one of the highest points in consciousness maturity. And yes, he got, a level of enlightenment. But there was one guy, Dr. David Hawkins, who did a scale called the Map of Consciousness, where he mapped out consciousness maturity on a logarithmic scale from 0 to 1,000. And he said, like, Jesus and Buddha were at like 600 or 700, and that was like the highest people had gotten.
Which is like a little over halfway.
Yeah, a little over halfway. But that was still, but it's logarithmic, so it was still a pretty high way up.
Oh yeah.
I think Buddha did get there, and he was like probably the most accomplished of all the people. I think he even got a little bit farther along than Jesus. If you want to read Dr. Hawkins's book, he actually shows where Jesus and Buddha landed on that scale. So
interesting.
It was interesting. He used kinesiology to develop that standard too. So
well, there's always been a theory about Jesus, how much those two things are connected. When you look at missing you, he possibly could he have studied these?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's always been it.
And if you look at it from, again, that global level, is that Jesus was a higher level being who came down into the physical to get people back on track. They were off in the ruts in their spiritual development, and he was trying to get them back on a path. Just the same thing with Buddha, the same thing with Krishna, the same thing with Gandhi, and Sai Baba is more recent. Is you have these avatars or spiritual leaders that come down to help people in specific parts of the world, stay on that path or, get back in that development realm. And that's just my explanation for it. Don't ask me to try and give you evidence or proof, but that's a subjective explanation for it. Hope that helps.
Frost Giant, make sure you're talking into your microphone. People
I
are
know. I still got some compressor issues when I don't speak loud. Good.
Mark, you were talking about spirits coming in to assist us with certain things, and it reminded me of the part of your book where you were talking about the beginning of your spiritual experiences and you having the experience that spirits were entering your body. And it clearly was freaking you out because you wanted to figure out how to get rid of them. Mm-hmm. But now, what do you think about that now that you've had all this learning and training and other experiences? What was that to you now?
Well, now I have it every day. I mean, they're just here all around, and it doesn't really bother me. But the first 3 years scared me to death. And I actually wrote about it because I wanted to be vulnerable in that aspect so that people who have had these spiritual experiences, if they read that, they would be more comfortable talking to me about their experiences. That's why I wrote it. Mm-hmm. But it's a maturing process too. I can see things and hear things and feel things, and it doesn't faze me or bother me at all. Whereas maybe a decade or 15 years ago it would.
So do you think now that those entities at that time were trying to help kind of get you on the path?
Yes. And I pissed off a lot of them. I did, because
why isn't this guy listening to us?
oh no, it's like, why is he undoing things that we're doing to him? So, and I had this really strong fear of the unknown, and to a degree, I still have it. I've got to experience something like 2 or 3 times before I'll let them do stuff. Mm-hmm. But just like with the Kundalini thing, I thought they were trying to, or some being was trying to, what do they call it? Take over your soul or your body or whatever.
Like possession.
I thought it was a possession. What they were doing was a possession, and they were actually activating my Kundalini. Mm. But they put a block around your spine, and they put a cap over your head, and it stays there for like a day or two, and then they pull it off. But when they were doing that, I was saying, oh no, this is some being trying to possess me, and I would undo it every night. And they would get so pissed off at me. and I thought it was just this negative being, coming after me. But no, it was these good beings saying, why don't you just stop?
It was a lesson in trust, Mark. It's a lesson in trust. It was
a lesson in trust. And, I'm not perfect. So to the people out there who have these issues and concerns, 99% of the spirits out there are benevolent or neutral. They're not going to hurt you. You just have to get over your fear of the unknown.
The question I had written down when I was reading the book, and now I think that you have answered it, but I wrote down, do you think this is happening to others or to everybody?
I think it's happening to others when they're ready for it. Mm-hmm. I don't think everybody's ready for it. Because when these spiritual things start happening to you, you start getting more interested in the esoteric. And that's a very small percentage of, the population. But that was the people who would go to these mystery schools hundreds and thousands of years ago. is when they started thinking that there was something more to life than what they were experiencing, or they've had something they couldn't explain. That's how they ended up at these mystery schools. Mm-hmm. So I think what happens to a lot of people is they start getting more interested in esoteric things, and if they change their worldview, and by me being out on my own, in solitary confinement, writing these books, that gave me the time to change my worldview and change my point of view, so that it's very different from what most people would believe today. And that makes it a little difficult for me to have a general conversation with somebody who wants to say things or do things,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a whole different perspective on it.
Tell me about it, my friend.
Yeah. So that's why your spiritual community is very important, because
Absolutely.
you need to be around people who can relate to you.
Who don't think that you're batshit crazy.
Who don't think you're batshit crazy. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's hard to get people to open up about that too. I've heard of people who for months and years would not share what had happened to them or what their experiences have been, just because of the negative reactions they had received from people in the past. And also too, they don't want to be put in a mental institution. Yes. Or, especially older people who had the threat of being declared schizophrenic and, institutionalized.
Yes.
And I wonder how many people were just ones who had these spiritual abilities who, when they tried to explain it to people, ended up, in these mental institutions and couldn't get out.
Yep.
Exactly. I don't know how many people that would affect, but I'd imagine there would be some.
It's probably a percentage of them for sure.
Yeah. And that's that's interesting, because I think we talked about this a little bit the first time you were on, but when you're someone who does talk about these things pretty openly, which is why we do this, mm-hmm. It's amazing how many times you have that conversation with someone who probably has never talked about the experiences that they've had before. But when they realize someone is open to discussing those things, they go, you know what, you might not believe this, but one time, and I hear that so often, and so much so, Mark, I actually did my first trip to the other side of the microphone, and I was a guest on somebody else's podcast, and they had they focus on just content creations, anything that people create, but so they're not in this world that we're in with Team Weird and all that kind of stuff, video games and whatever mm-hmm. is being created. And when I went on that show and talked to them, bam, there we go. Well, you know what? Like before we went live, you know what? I had this happen one time, and I had this happen one time, and then the stories became so crazy. We're actually going to have him on the show next month because they've had some really crazy experiences to talk about. But it's like you said, it's one of those things where people keep that kind of bottled up, and then when they find somebody or someone who's open to actually receiving those experiences, everything goes.
So just to give you an example too, there was a time I was with a metaphysical organization. We went out to lunch at a restaurant, and our waiter had a near-death experience. He was out swimming in the ocean with a friend. His friend died, and he almost drowned. But he was revived or whatever. But then he had this guilt for the next few days, that his best friend had died, and his best friend came to him and told him, "Don't worry about it." But he went 15 years without telling anyone that story. And only because he was serving a group of people who all understood it, he opened up and said that first time in 15 years.
Wow. Yeah, sometimes it just takes knowing that someone's not going to ridicule you for.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And that's why this training in transformational coaching, I want to give Elizabeth another plug. Spiritual emergence, that's why that's important, is you need people to validate what you've been through and to help you assimilate what's happened to you into your life, so that you can integrate it and make it a part of you and not just be something that's dangling out there that's never been addressed. It's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably a lot more people need stuff like that than we even realize.
They do. And fortunately and hopefully, I think that's changing now, because I think with more young people coming along who just have had these experiences all their lives, it's not so unusual to talk about them. And that's why I'm encouraged. Also, too, I'm just going to toss the words out, indigo children, rainbow children, crystal children. I think, that's an explanation for what's happening with a lot of the kids coming around now, is that it's just a natural part of evolution. It's a physical evolution of humanity that we're going through, is because we've reached that level of consciousness to where this can be generally available to people, again, on a level 1 and 2 out of 10, so that people can start experiencing it, getting used to it, and believing that it'll work.
Yeah. That sounds wonderful. Let's keep going.
I was going to say, to add on to that too, people, with the younger generation, but I think with technology too, I think with the internet, people have been able to find their corners. And so if there's something they were interested in, maybe in 1985 or in 1993, you maybe couldn't find those people to talk to or to get the information you wanted. But I think that's led to an increase in.
Yeah, no, I agree. So if you don't mind, can I change the subject a little bit?
Yes,
that is fine.
There was some other things.
That is fine. What else would you like to talk about?
Because I've been thinking and writing about something lately that I wanted to see what people, on the podcast would think about it, and it's called "Living in the Sweet Spot of Life." And I mentioned this to you guys before we got online, but I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. And if you, again, look at that high level of why are we here? What are we here to do? We're here to mature our consciousness, to have these, and by experiences, to do that. You say, what's the best way to have those experiences? And you think about people who are wealthy or have a lot of power and influence. And you think that may be, what you want to strive for, to achieve. And I would say from a spiritual standpoint, it's probably not, because money, wealth, power, and influence, celebrity is an insulator from the harshness of life. And I would like to suggest, to throw out, and I want to hear what people on the podcast think, is that it's people who have just enough money to pay all their bills, just enough in the size of house to be comfortable. If they have health problems, it's just enough to cause difficulties, but not incapacitate them to where they can't do things. But they still have the ability to help other people. And I think it's that just enough lifestyle that people have, living modestly, but yet building goodwill with others by helping people in need, that teaches you more about life, because you become vulnerable to life. You can have your own trials and troubles and stuff, but then the people that you've helped can come back and help you and smooth out the rough sides or the rough aspects of what you're going through. But I think that allows you to develop spiritually quicker than having a life that you're more insulated from. And I just wondered what people thought.
All right, guys, what do you think?
Yeah, what do we think in chat? So is there a sweet spot? Lifestyle and spiritual development.
All right, linguists. I knew that linguists would be the first one to chime in.
Yes.
Here's the thing. Some souls that have increased their vibration high enough and are ready to make great impact, they incarnate wealthy or skillful to help increase our consciousness as a whole, which was something you were kind of talking about at the beginning, that like those people, those entities that have gotten to a certain level might come in as the people that are in control of things, so we don't mess it up.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Just specifically with money, to have freedom to make choices that would lead to increased consciousness. And I think there's something to be said about that, about it's, leisure. Being able to have that moment to actually reflect on those things too. Because someone who's constantly working, constantly stressed, and constantly worried about this and that almost doesn't have the time
to develop any spiritual,
to reflect. So it's having enough of that leisure time without. So I think there would be a balance. There would have to be a balance. Because if you didn't have any worries, and you hadn't had to, walk through the coals, so to speak, I think you have to have that to a certain extent. Although I'm sure you could probably speak to a lot of people who from or maybe from my perspective, did have a lot of things that were given to them, and they had a good starting position, that still would argue maybe that they had a lot of their own things they had to deal with that were just as important, but that is a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Keisha said, I've always requested just enough, and when the bottom fell out, enough was unsustainable. I love the idea, and I've always said that I would love to put my hand in my pocket and have just enough for the needs, but that's not always how that works, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this just enough lifestyle as being a spiritual test, so that you keep having these things piled on you, and as you get older, you have more and more health issues and more things that happen to you, and it's like, how much can you take on and still be able to love other people? At what point do you collapse into yourself and just protect yourself? And I think each time that happens, you become a little stronger. You become a little better, and you get more confidence in being able to continue doing it, knowing that something will happen, things will work out. And I think that's part of the spiritual process as well. And as I was talking, I was sitting there thinking, I fit that mold more now than when I was younger growing up. I had more resources to where I didn't have the harshness of life encroaching on me. But I think that was to allow me to have these spiritual experiences, to spend all the time reading all these books, figuring out what was going on, and do that development. But now, at this point in my life, I'm getting more into that just enough lifestyle, but I'm not there. Let me put it that way. I could go a lot farther, but I think that's what happens to people, is you start getting more and more taken away and more things happening to you, just to see how far you can go, but then also to use that as training to make you stronger.
We have a couple more here. Hoaxer says, I do think there is a sweet spot in spirituality, as Mark says. Too much money or freedom can cause things worse than solution. And Shadow Max said, mostly we long to feel like we matter, like we belong. These things are oxygen to our souls. When they're missing, we feel off. Outward status symbols of achievement, big salaries, or big time job titles are hollow replacement.
Yeah.
Nicely put.
And let me mention one other thing too. Your goal here on Earth is to have these experiences. And you may start off, in a good situation or in a bad situation. You may have a dysfunctional family. You may have had substance abuse issues, or different issues in life. But your goal in life is to see how you can clean all that up and develop spiritually. That's your path. It's not making a lot of money, not being a celebrity, not doing all these things. And when you say, I don't amount to much, or my life doesn't mean much, it means a lot, because you're here for that experience. And that's the big benefit for your life, and it's just between you and the spiritual people beings that are helping you get through it. You're here for that experience. And if you look at it that way, then you don't have to compare yourself to other people. You don't have to worry about, getting that promotion or getting that bonus or whatever like that, or having these material things. You can focus more on the spiritual. And I hope that gives some solace to people.
And I think that goes along. We have another one from CMC Air Boss, and he said, in my experience, it is the completion of several major trials in life and perseverance to pull through, along with setting myself up for financial independence that allows a focus on things beyond the trials of daily life. And I can connect to that one, because I think that one kind of rang true with me, of like going through a lot of these different trials and life experiences that I've had personally, and then been able to work in my career and get to a point where, like I said earlier, almost where you can get that point where there can be enough leisure time to be able to actually try to latch on to those things and test them and try them and grow and with them. And then on top of it, like for Medium Jenny and for other people that we've talked about earlier that are, you know, trying to do focus their life on spirituality, you have to have some kind of way to be able to make that transition, you know, to where that becomes your focus, your sole focus, trying to accomplish.
Right. Or just trust that transition will happen for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I was going to say for couples too, you know, the importance in life is, you know, being together, communicating, raising a family, doing the right things. You know, it's not about keeping up with the Joneses, having these expensive vacations, you know, having these really expensive cars or big houses and things. It's the blocking and tackling, the nuts and bolts of life. That's what's really important. It's all that experience.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like there's a reason, you know, a nice vacation is great if you want the nice vacation for the right purposes, because you need to unwind, because you've worked really hard, because you want to enjoy time with your family and enjoy leisure time with people that you love. Maybe not so much if the only reason you're going on vacations is to show them off on your social media feed. Right. A different reason behind that. And we have a lot more. We had a linguist say another thing: when you follow your soul's purpose, you make choices that lead to abundance. The opposite happens when obviously you make choices that are incongruent with soul's purpose. And Mr. Weird said, is there any correlation, do you think, between the spiritual path and Maslow's hierarchy?
Yes. And I put that in my third book, not in my fourth book, but I actually showed how what happens in life is you climb up Maslow's hierarchy of needs from the very basic physiological needs, the safety and validation needs, to self-actualization. But then as you reach that peak, or whatever the peak is for your life, you start down the other side where things are taken away. You have more disabilities, you have more struggles to see how much you can take on. So I see it as climbing that pyramid and then going down the other side. And it's how far down on the other side can you get, taking advantage of everything you learned on the way up. I hope that answers it.
I think so, yeah. Yes. Well, we have managed to make our way to almost 10 o'clock again already.
We've done it again.
I know, I'm shocked.
We've done it again.
You remember, but before we did the first one, you said, "Do you think we'll have enough time to talk for an hour?"
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
And here we are.
This has been good. And
4 hours later, and we probably still haven't talked about all the things we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and thanks and props to all the people who made comments tonight, because I really appreciate your comments and what you said. It makes a big impact on my life.
Well,
they already want you to come back again.
Keisha Linguist already asking when you're coming back. So,
well, I was going to say, and thanks to Linguist for all the funny haha memes and for being spicy in general.
Yes, spicy Linguist. Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get it panned out, and of course we'll have a friend of the program. So
yes.
So we'll probably end it here tonight, though, and we'll pick up where we left off next time.
Mark had a whole bunch of really cool 3D printed things to share with us too, so that might have to be a whole nother stream.
So didn't even do that. So here's the Taurus.
Let's do it again, and we'll set a reminder when we talk about this that we'll lead off with that next time.
Yes, we'll do the Taurus stuff next time,
and we'll jump into all of that. Jump into all that fun stuff. So thanks again for everyone coming and hanging out and being part of the conversation tonight. Just to catch you up, 2 weeks from tonight, we will have Cheryl Costa on the show, and she's going to talk about UAPs or UFOs, and specifically some books she's written about where sightings take place in each state. So she's been putting together data of where sightings take place in each state, where people are seeing UFOs, and we'll get more into that
so
when
you
we
guys
have
can
her.
ask about your states.
Yeah.
You all live in different places.
And then on May 11th, and the show after that, we're going to have Diabolic Tutor on. He is a Twitch streamer who streams video games and also hosts the podcast In Bed by 9 with his co-host Jeremy Cunnings. And he is going to come on and talk about what I was talking about earlier, some experiences he has had as all the way from childhood into adulthood, and how he kind of dealt with those, and also the idea of like the going generational from one generation to the next. And so we're going to have him on and probably talk about Twitch streaming and maybe some stuff we don't normally talk about, but also get into some of that good ghost stuff that we talk about. So that's what we have coming up in the next month for this show. And then I'm sure sometime this summer we'll bring Mark Hunter Brooks back, and we'll get going again. You got anything else for you, Jenny?
Tomorrow night's stream night, and Keisha's been sharing everything else. So
excellent.
Yeah.
And one final time, Mark, is there anything you want to share? Any places that people should go to check out your stuff?
No, I'm good. I think you put the links in the last time I was on. I don't think the Twitter link made it up there, but the others were there.
Okay.
So go check out the book. We've talked about it a lot. I know that Medium Jenny Lee was devouring it voraciously, and telling me I need to get into it and read it myself. But she was telling me all about it. We were having discussions about it while we're cooking dinner and all kinds of stuff. So there it is, Earth's Hidden Reality. Go check it out. If you don't have it yet, buy it, and have questions for the next time. Thanks again, everybody. Everyone take care, and we will see you all next time.